"Let's raise a toast," she said, her glass held high, shimmering under the golden light of our backyard. "To the man who's truly led this household. To the real man behind my every success, my boss, Mr. Chandler." Laughter followed. Not mine. I stood there, among friends, colleagues, neighbors, people who'd seen me mow that lawn every Sunday, fix every broken pipe and carry every grocery bag. They all heard it. Every word. Every sting of it. I had just retired that morning after 37 years at the same company. I had imagined this party as a small celebration of a life built brick by brick, hour by hour, dollar by dollar. A quiet man's triumph. Instead, I stood at the center of a carefully curated humiliation, smiling like a fool. I watched her, my wife of 29 years, bat her lashes at a man, 20 years her senior, a man who wore power like cologne. And I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This toast wasn't accidental. It was a statement, a performance, her way of rewriting our story, recasting him as the hero. But I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I let the silence stretch. Then I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a crisp envelope, and placed it on the table beside the champagne. I didn't say a word, but the bold black letters on the front said everything. Deed to property, 245 Brookline Avenue, sole owner, David Lawrence. And suddenly, the laughter stopped. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it's public, but what happened next, no one saw coming. I met Rachel when I was 25, and she was fresh out of college, bright, driven, with a smile that could cut through the grayest Monday. I was a junior technician at a manufacturing plant back then, working long shifts and saving every penny to someday afford a house, maybe even a family. She was working the reception desk at a small insurance firm. We weren't glamorous, but we were honest. And in those early years, that felt like enough. We bought our first house with a loan, a modest 2-bedroom fixer-upper. I handled the repairs, she painted the kitchen a buttery yellow, and we built our life between drywall dust and takeout dinners. When she decided to go back to school for a business degree, I worked overtime to cover the tuition. I didn't complain, her dreams felt like mine too. Years passed. She climbed the ladder, first a manager, then a director. Eventually, she landed a senior role at a private firm run by a man named Marcus Chandler. I remember the first time I met him at a company dinner. He was charming, charismatic, and far too touchy with his compliments. "He's harmless," she said, laughing when I mentioned it later. "Just a big personality." And I believed her, because I had to. As her career soared, I stayed in my lane. Same job, same modest salary, but I kept the house running. I made her lunch every morning, repaired anything that broke, paid off our mortgage early, and never forgot an anniversary. But little things began to shift. She started working later, phone always on silent. Vacations became conference trips, and when she was home, she was distant, distracted. Then came the whispers. A neighbor mentioned seeing her car parked outside the Chandler estate on a Saturday night. A colleague of mine, whose wife worked in the same firm, said they'd been spotted together at a jazz bar 2 towns over. I laughed it off, pretending it was absurd, because to admit otherwise meant admitting I was nothing more than a placeholder in my own life. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was the slow erosion of affection. She stopped saying thank you when I fixed the sink. She started rolling her eyes at my jokes. When I told her I was retiring soon, she barely looked up from her phone. "That's good," she said flatly. "Guess you'll have more time to clean the garage." I told myself she was just stressed, until the night before the party, when I overheard her on the phone. "I'm telling you, he's harmless. He still thinks this house is some kind of legacy. Just smile, raise a glass, and let him have his moment. Then we can move on." Move on. 2 words that felt like a blade to the chest. This house was supposed to be our legacy, built with calloused hands, long hours, and quiet devotion. But to her, it was a stage. A final performance before the curtain dropped on me, and still I said nothing. Not that night. Not when she picked out her new dress for the party. Not when she rehearsed her speech in front of the mirror, softening the words that would cut deepest. Because I knew something she didn't. I had been planning my retirement for months, but I had also been preparing for something else. Something far more final. Silence can be sharper than any scream. And in the weeks leading up to my retirement, I wrapped myself in it like armor. While Rachel texted under the covers and chuckled at messages she never shared, I watched. I remembered. I started listening between her words, noting the way she always smiled when his name came up, or how she quickly turned her screen away when I entered the room. She thought I was fading, that after a lifetime of labor, I would drift into the background like an old recliner, comfortable, harmless, forgettable. But she didn't know that I was paying attention. I began waking up earlier than her. It wasn't hard, she was always asleep before I even came to bed. I started reviewing old papers, digging through filing cabinets and digital folders she never touched. I found a copy of our house deed, printed and signed more than a decade ago, only my name on it. I remembered that day clearly. She was in grad school when we refinanced. The mortgage was shifted under my name solely for legal simplicity. At the time, it felt like a mere technicality. No, it felt like a revelation. I called the county clerk's office to confirm. The property was mine, entirely, unquestionably, and I asked for a certified copy, mailed to me discreetly. At the same time, I visited a lawyer, an old friend from high school, who'd gone into estate law. We met at a diner, over black coffee and low voices. I asked him what would happen if I passed the house down in a living trust, effective immediately. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you planning on dying?" "No," I said, "just planning on living the rest of my life differently." He smiled. He always did enjoy puzzles. I also made quiet moves at the bank. We had a joint account, but I'd kept a separate savings account in my name since before we were married. Over the years, it had grown bonuses, dividends, side contracts no one thought I took. She never asked about it. She assumed I was just the man who fixed the dishwasher and collected loose change in a coffee tin. In truth, I had close to $400,000 saved, and I moved it all, quietly, into a trust, not out of spite, but out of preservation. Meanwhile, she stayed busy, too busy to notice that I no longer asked questions, that I no longer tried to make her laugh at dinner, that I no longer offered to rub her shoulders when she sighed in the hallway. She thought I was wilting. I was waiting. A week before the retirement party, I saw them together at a cafe. She didn't see me. He was leaning in. She was laughing, head tilted, hand on his knee. It wasn't subtle. But I didn't rage. I didn't confront her. Instead, I took a picture. I printed it out. Not to use, not to wave like a flag of betrayal, but to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that the ache in my chest wasn't paranoia, that what I was about to do was not cruel, it was clarity. Then I bought a new suit, navy, clean lines. I had it tailored to fit exactly the way I wanted it to. On the morning of the party, I woke up early, brewed her favorite coffee, and brought it to her bedside. She barely mumbled a thank you. I just smiled, because by then I had everything I needed, and she had no idea. The morning of the party was bright and cool, one of those rare spring Saturdays in Connecticut, where the sky looks painted, and the breeze feels like a reward for surviving winter. Rachel was buzzing with energy, floating through the house in heels too high, and a dress too tight for a woman who used to laugh at women like that. She coordinated with the caterers, the florist, even rented a small podium for her speech. She told me the guest list was about 50. I counted 72. She invited Marcus Chandler. Of course she did. I nodded when she told me, pretended it was fine. After all, she said, he's helped me so much in my career. It's only right to include him. I told her I was grateful, and in a way, I was. Because this wasn't just a celebration of my retirement anymore. It had become the perfect stage. At 3 p.m. sharp, our backyard was a showroom of curated perfection white tents, golden chairs, tablecloths pressed to military precision. Guests poured in, neighbors, old friends, co-workers, strangers I'd never seen but who hugged Rachel like family. I stood near the back patio, sipping iced tea and accepting half-hearted congratulations from people who had no idea they were watching the final scene of a play they hadn't realized they were in. And then he arrived. Marcus Chandler, tall, tan, polished like a luxury car. He wore a navy linen suit and Ray-Bans, and he kissed Rachel on the cheek like he owned her. Maybe he thought he did. He shook my hand. "Congratulations, David," he said with a smirk. "Must feel good to finally rest." "Not quite yet," I replied. "Still have a few things to finish." He chuckled. Didn't ask what. The first part of the afternoon was uneventful. Smiles, music, overcooked shrimp skewers. I gave a short, generic thank you speech. Everyone clapped. But I could see the way Rachel kept checking her phone. She wasn't waiting for my moment. She was waiting for hers. And then she got it. She clinked her glass. The room, our backyard, fell quiet. She took the podium. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. She began with polite words about my years of service, my loyalty, my grounded presence. But then her tone shifted. Behind every great man is a woman, she said, smiling sweetly. But sometimes the real man isn't the one you think. Laughter, confused at first, then more confident as she gestured toward Marcus. He's been the backbone of my career, the steady voice when things got tough, the mentor who pushed me further than I ever thought I could go. In many ways, he's the reason our home stands as it does today. So here's to Marcus Chandler, the real man of the house. Applause. My heart didn't race. My fists didn't clench. Instead, I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a manila envelope, and walked to the table in front of the podium. I placed the envelope down deliberately and turned back to face the crowd. I appreciate all the kind words, I said calmly. And Rachel, your toast was enlightening. But before we continue, there's something I'd like to share with everyone. I opened the envelope and pulled out the deed. 245 Brookline Avenue, NU, I read aloud. Owned entirely by David Lawrence. Signed, notarized, and filed. I held it up like a trophy. The applause died instantly. The silence was deafening. Rachel's smile cracked. But she started. No, I said. We didn't. Not this house. Not this deed. Not anymore. I looked at Marcus. You're welcome to raise your glass in any home you own. But this one's mine. Then I turned back to the guests. And since this home is my sole property, I'd like to make one final announcement. I pulled out the second document, a trust transfer. Legal. Immediate. As of this morning, this house has been placed into a living trust under my daughter's name. Fully protected. Fully removed from joint marital assets. More silence. You could hear someone set their champagne flute down too hard. I didn't have a daughter with Rachel. That was the final twist. My daughter was from my first marriage, long before Rachel. She lived in Arizona. Quiet, reserved, and far away from all of this. Rachel never cared to know her. And now, this house would never belong to her, or anyone she chose to bring into it. I smiled gently, handed the documents to my lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the back row, and nodded. Now, I said, let's continue the party. I walked past Rachel as her face contorted, part rage, part disbelief. I didn't flinch. I had spent 30 years building this life, the last few months building this moment, and now I was finally free. The fallout didn't wait until the next day. It began that very hour. Rachel didn't speak to me for the rest of the party. She stood there, frozen, eyes darting across the guests, silently begging someone to say it was all a joke. But no one did, because no one could. The neighbors avoided her gaze. Her co-workers from Chandler and Company whispered in tight circles. Even Marcus, the man she had so confidently crowned the real man of the house, suddenly looked like a boy caught in the wrong classroom. I excused myself shortly after the announcement and let the party decay without me. I watched from the upstairs window as guests awkwardly filtered out, their curiosity satiated, their champagne glasses still half full. The woman who once controlled every detail of her perfect image was now crumbling under the weight of a truth she could no longer control. The next morning, I found her on the patio, staring at the backyard as if it had betrayed her too. She didn't ask me why I did it. She knew. That week, she moved in with a friend temporarily, she said. She still believed the house would somehow come back to her, that I had acted out of emotion, and would eventually revert to the man who fixed leaks and brewed her morning coffee. But he didn't, because he was gone. 2 weeks later, news broke that Marcus Chandler was under internal investigation. Apparently, someone had forwarded a confidential HR email chain to the company board messages between Marcus and Rachel that suggested more than mentorship. I never saw those emails. I never claimed responsibility for leaking them, but someone did. Within a month, Marcus was removed from his executive position. Rachel, though not formally dismissed, found herself isolated, left out of key meetings. Her promotion quietly revoked. She resigned, shortly after, citing hostile work environment. The irony must have tasted like ash. Mutual friends called me, some cautiously, some curiously. A few even apologized. We never knew, they said. I didn't need them to. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebalancing the truth. Rachel tried contacting me, emails, voicemails, long-winded letters, apologizing for the way things unfolded. She never actually said sorry for what she did, just that she regretted how it looked, how it ended. But by then, the house was empty of her, not just physically, but spiritually. The walls no longer echoed her heels. The kitchen no longer reeked of her silence. I replaced the curtains, repainted the living room, donated the furniture she picked out to a women's shelter. She had designed every inch of that home to reflect her version of success. Now it reflected something else entirely: peace. At the grocery store, people still approached me with soft words and tentative smiles. I became that guy from the party, the man who stayed calm while the world cracked open around him. Some said I should write a book. Others just nodded, quietly grateful that someone finally said the things so many men never get to say. But he didn't need the recognition. I just needed my name on the deed, and the knowledge that when I walked out onto my porch each morning, I was standing on ground no one could take from me. Not anymore. 1 year later, the house is quieter, but it breathes easier. I wake up before the sun most mornings. The coffee tastes stronger now, maybe because I don't brew it out of obligation. I sit by the window and watch the light stretch across the lawn. I still mow myself. It's not much, but it's mine. Every inch of it earned, defended, and reclaimed. Rachel never came back. She tried, of course. A few emails here and there. Once, she left a note in the mailbox apologizing, asking for a conversation, not closure. But I never responded, because some conversations are just another way to reopen wounds that have already scarred over. I heard she moved to a condo in the city. Smaller space, fewer guests. From what little I gathered through mutual acquaintances, she's been trying to find consulting work. But without Marcus, without her title, and without the carefully cultivated image of the power couple she tried to present, doors don't open as easily anymore. As for Marcus, last I heard, he'd quietly left the state. Some say he's in Florida, trying to rebrand himself as a strategic advisor. Others say he's facing legal trouble for misconduct that predated his downfall. I don't know the truth. I don't care to. What matters is that he's gone. And so is the version of me that tolerated being invisible in my own life. I've taken up woodworking. I spend afternoons in the garage, shaping slabs of maple and pine into furniture I'll never sell. The process grounds me, the patience it takes, the steady hands required. It's proof that something beautiful can come from pieces others would discard. My daughter visits every other month. We sit on the back porch and talk about everything and nothing. She told me once, "I've never seen you this light." And she was right, because for the first time in decades, I'm not holding my breath. Sometimes I still think about that day, Rachel's toast, the stunned faces, the way silence fell like a curtain. And I wonder how differently it all might have gone if I had interrupted her sooner, if I had spoken up during the slow unraveling years, instead of waiting for the thread to snap. But then again, maybe I needed that silence. Maybe I needed to feel the weight of it all, to understand that strength isn't loud, it's deliberate. It's knowing when to speak and when to simply pull out the deed and let it speak for itself. You know, we got lowing. I only regret not loving myself sooner. Now when I walk through the front door, I don't feel like a guest. I feel like a man who stood still while the storm tried to blow him over and stayed standing. This is my home, and I am the man of this house. In life, silence is often mistaken for weakness, but sometimes it is the most powerful response. This story reminds us that dignity does not require shouting, and that respect, both self-given and demanded, is not built overnight, but earned through resilience. The quiet man at the center of this tale endured betrayal not with rage, but with preparation, clarity, and self-worth. He didn't seek revenge through chaos. He reclaimed his life through calm, calculated truth. His story teaches us that we do not need to match the cruelty of others to find justice. Instead, we can choose to walk away with our head held high, knowing who we are and what we stand for. In a world that often rewards noise and ego, this man chose grace and intention, and in doing so, he reminded us all that the most powerful victories are the ones we don't have to scream about. If this story moved you the way it moved us, take a moment to reflect on what it means to reclaim your worth with quiet strength instead of noise. David didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't seek revenge in the way we so often see in drama. He planned, he endured, and when the moment came, he stood tall with truth in his hand and peace in his heart. What would you say to him now? Would you tell him he did the right thing? That he waited too long? Or that his silence spoke louder than any outburst ever could? Leave a comment below. Show David the support he never asked for but absolutely deserves. And if you've ever been in a similar situation, your story matters too. Share it. And for David, maybe it's time to travel. Time to explore the parts of life he put on hold. After all, retirement isn't the end, it's just the start of a life truly owned.